I promise that this is the last devlog dedicated entirely to avatars. I am basically done with the design work needed to implement them into the game, though of course integrating them into the story will be a long process occurring alongside the rest of the ROM development. And in the next devlog I will finally get started on a new chapter. It took only 2.5 times as long as I had hoped it would. And yes, I did say last week that all that I had left to do for avatars was portraits, but that turned out not to be the case, because upon taking a second look at the skill distribution, I noticed one element of it causing an issue. Can you guess which one? It was the wolf. Of course it was the wolf. I love having it as a class because it allows for an avatar that is nothing like the other ones, which gives cool possibilities for design and storytelling, but it is also the bane of my existence. I happened to notice that the naive flaw needed changing, because for every origin it overlapped with another combination. Then I noticed that either the rescued from an injury origin or the sickly flaw needed adjusting, because currently the combination of them resulted in the social practical combination, which gives the bargain skill, which is the one skill I didn't want the wolf to be able to obtain, since all it does is halves the prices in the shops, and I am considering preventing the wolf from entering the shops in the first place, if I can figure out how to implement that. But after I made these two changes, the sluggish flaw ended up overlapping for every origin. And so it went, every fix seeming to break something else. I even got myself a calculator to easily check how the changes to the values of origins and flaws would affect the combinations. There was definitely a moment when I was convinced that none of this would end up working, and I would be better off assigning the skills manually. After all, with only 4 origins and 6 flaws, it was just 24 combinations, which is a very reasonable amount when compared to the 216 combinations that the human avatar has. But I was stubborn, so though it did take me 2 days of admittedly very limited time, and normally I would probably be able to do it in a day, I pulled it off in the end, finding a combination of values that allowed for every single skill except bargain to be obtainable, even if it was at the cost of making the values given by the wolf's traits somewhat arbitrary. Sluggish, for instance, just being completely neutral, where for human avatars it is a penalty to physical and practical. And only after that was done I was able to get started on portraits, which also turned out to be a big pain. At first it didn't seem too bad, different classes would of course need different portraits, but there is a patch that lets you change a character's portrait based on their class and flags. Simple enough. Except I wanted appearance customization, or rather, the closest thing I could get to it with my very limited ROM hacking skill and knowledge of GBA's limitations. I knew that I wouldn't be able to make anything like the normal customization of the avatar's appearance, so I ended up with just a choice between 2 different portraits for each of the 9 classes. That idea itself was reasonable, and the implementation of it would be simple. Except I had to find 18 fitting portraits first, and I already talked about how hard it can be to find a specific thing on the graphics repository. Especially when, to fit the criteria of fitting, the portraits would have to be ones that would look right on a default palette character. Because guess what? Fire Emblem 8 allows for a maximum of 7 class-specific battle animation palettes per character, which would only be enough for 1/3 of the avatar classes, if we count the promotions. I spent a while searching before accepting the fact that I will have to recolor some of the portraits to get what I need. And even then, it wasn't a walk in the park. There were plenty of viable candidates for female knights, for instance, male cavaliers or troubadours, but I only managed to find 2 portraits that could fit a thief with a ponytail. And in some cases even recoloring the portraits wasn't enough, and I ended up having to edit the default battle animation palette of the class, because for example I only had 2 portraits that I thought would work for the supplier, and on one of them I couldn't make green clothes work. Or because all the troubadour portraits were a feather in their hair, which is an element I wanted to have since it is the signature look for at least the GBA era troubadours. They all have that feather in the same color as their clothing, and I didn't want it to be purple. And of course, the wolf continued being the bane of my existence. because for some reason, whoever made the battle animation for it made the shadow color different to every other shadow in the game. And its default palette didn't really fit with the palette of either of the only two wolf portraits that I found. And to make it worse for me, I wasn't able to consolidate the palettes of these two portraits either. They are just far too different. So the wolf will once again get special treatment, and I will have to implement either two classes or two sets of identical weapons for him, the only difference between them being the animation they are assigned, which is actually the same animation, except with different palettes, one for the white wolf, one for the grey one. I am not 100% sure about the cavalier portraits, since for them I took the armor colors directly from the default battle sprites, and they might be a bit too bright, but whether or not that is the case, you have to admit there is something satisfying about having portraits recolored to share most of their palettes. And yeah, that's all I've got to share this week. Thanks for watching, consider doing the YouTube things if you enjoyed my ramblings, and until next time, farewell.